My name is Sheriff Linda Crawford, and I've been the elected sheriff of Summit County, Colorado for 19 years now. Before that, I spent 8 years with the Denver Police Department working major crimes, and another 4 years with the Colorado State Patrol assigned to the high country corridors where avalanches and weather kill more people than crime ever will. I've investigated homicides in circumstances so brutal they made seasoned detectives lose their composure. I've recovered bodies from avalanche debris and crevasses where the cold preserves them in positions of final terror. I've worked missing persons cases in wilderness so vast that entire families can vanish without a trace. And I've dealt with situations that would make most people question why anyone would choose to live at 10,000 feet elevation, where winter lasts 8 months and nature is actively trying to kill you. I tell you this so you understand that I'm not someone who scares easily or who believes in holiday magic or supernatural nonsense. I deal in evidence, in witness statements, in chain of custody and probable cause and documentation that will hold up in court. Or at least I did until December 25th, 2023. Before I tell you what happened in the area we call the Frozen Basin, before I explain why I can no longer respond to calls on the peak-to-peak highway after midnight on Christmas Eve, and why I keep spruce branches and silver bells in my patrol vehicle for reasons that would get me committed if I tried to explain them to the county commissioners, I need you to do something for me. If you're watching this video, if you follow these stories from sheriffs and law enforcement who've encountered things that exist outside any rational framework, please subscribe and like this video. What I'm about to share violates confidentiality agreements and probably breaks a dozen departmental policies. But after what I witnessed, after what I became, staying silent feels like leaving others vulnerable to the same fate. And I'm curious, where are you watching from right now? Have you ever been to the Colorado high country in winter? To those mountains where the snow falls so deep it buries entire buildings and the cold gets so severe that exposed skin freezes in minutes? Have you ever felt the weight of winter watching you, measuring you, deciding whether to let you survive? Drop a comment below. Tell me if you felt it. Tell me if you've heard the bells. Summit County sits high in the Colorado Rockies, covering 619 square miles of terrain that ranges from 8,700 feet elevation at the valleys to over 14,000 feet at the peaks. Most people know the area for the ski resorts, for Breckenridge and Keystone and Copper Mountain, for the tourists who come to experience winter recreation in some of the most dramatic mountain scenery in North America. But those resorts occupy maybe 5% of the county's total area. The rest is wilderness, national forest land, abandoned mining claims from the 1800s, ghost towns that were thriving communities during the silver boom, and are now just collections of collapsed cabins slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The Frozen Basin is in the northwestern corner of my jurisdiction, a region of high alpine terrain that sits between 11,500 and 13,200 feet elevation, a bowl-shaped valley surrounded by peaks on 3 sides, with only one access road that's passable maybe 5 months out of the year, and impassable the rest of the time due to snow depths that can reach 20 feet or more. There are no permanent residents in the Frozen Basin, no ski resorts, no commercial development of any kind. Just a few summer cabins that are completely buried under snow from November through May. And vast expanses of spruce forest and alpine meadows that in winter become a landscape so hostile to human life that even experienced mountaineers avoid the area. The Ute people, who lived in these mountains before European contact, had names for the frozen basin that translate roughly to where winter lives, or the place winter comes from, or land that belongs to the cold. There are accounts from the 1860s and 1870s of miners who tried to work claims in the basin during winter, and who reported strange phenomena. Bells ringing in the forest when no churches existed within 50 miles. Figures moving through the snow during blizzards that looked human but moved wrong, left tracks that appeared and disappeared without following any logical path. There are records from the early 1900s of Forest Service rangers who documented unusual wildlife behavior in the basin, elk and deer that would stand motionless in clearings as if waiting for something, mountain lions that refused to enter certain areas even when pursuing prey. Most of that history has been filed away as frontier superstition, or altitude sickness, or the psychological effects of isolation and extreme cold. But those of us who patrol this county, who respond to calls in the most remote areas, who work search and rescue operations in conditions that would kill unprepared people in hours, we know there's something else in the frozen basin, something that has nothing to do with weather patterns or wildlife behavior, and everything to do with places where winter itself has become conscious, aware, hungry. December 25th, 2023, started as a clear, brutally cold morning. I came on duty at 0600 hours for a holiday shift that would run until 1800 hours, covering for deputies who had families and wanted to spend Christmas Day at home. The temperature at the station in Frisco was minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit, and the forecast called for it to drop to minus 30 or lower overnight, with winds gusting to 50 miles per hour. Dangerous conditions even by high country standards. Most of my shift was routine holiday work. A welfare check on an elderly man in Silverthorne who turned out to be fine, just sleeping in. A minor fender bender in a parking lot in Dillon, where tourists unfamiliar with ice had slid into each other. A noise complaint from a vacation rental where people were partying too loudly. Normal, small-town sheriff work. Then at 15:47 hours, just as the sun was starting to drop toward the western peaks and the temperature was beginning its nighttime plunge, dispatch called me with something that made no sense. They'd received a 911 call from a satellite phone, the caller identifying himself as Marcus Chen, saying he and his wife Emma were stranded on the Peak-to-Peak Highway, approximately 6 miles north of the Frozen Basin turnoff. Their vehicle had broken down. They had limited cold weather gear, and they needed immediate assistance. The dispatcher asked what they were doing on that road in December. The Peak-to-Peak Highway through that section is officially closed from November 1st through May 31st, barricaded at both ends with signs warning that winter travel is forbidden, that the road is not maintained, that attempting to drive it in winter conditions is potentially fatal. Marcus said they'd moved the barricade because their GPS had routed them that way, and they'd thought the closure signs were just suggestions, that surely the road couldn't be that dangerous. They'd made it about 18 miles before their SUV's engine had overheated and died, and now they were stuck with night approaching and temperature dropping and no way to call for help, except the satellite phone they'd brought for backcountry skiing. I acknowledged the call and headed north on Highway 9 toward the Peak-to-Peak intersection. The location Marcus had described was approximately 35 miles from the station, most of it on maintained roads, but the last 6 miles on the closed section, where I'd need to either snowmobile in or attempt to drive my patrol vehicle through snow that might be several feet deep. As I drove, I radioed dispatch and had them pull any available information on Marcus and Emma Chen. They came back with basics. California residents, both in their early 30s, here on vacation, staying at a rental property in Breckenridge, both experienced skiers and hikers, but neither with significant winter mountaineering experience. I also had dispatch contact search and rescue and put them on standby, because if the Chens were where they said they were, and if their vehicle was disabled, we'd need specialized equipment and personnel to extract them safely. I arrived at the southern barricade for the closed section of Peak-to-Peak Highway at 16:23 hours, just as the sun touched the western peaks and the light started taking on that deep orange quality that in the mountains means you have maybe 30 minutes before full darkness. The barricade had been moved aside, tire tracks visible in the snow, leading north into the closed section. I radioed my position to dispatch, confirmed that search and rescue was mobilizing and would meet me at this location within 45 minutes, and made a decision that I've questioned every day since. I should have waited for SAR. I should have waited for backup and proper equipment and personnel who were trained for exactly this kind of extraction. But the temperature was dropping fast, already down to -22, and the Chens had been stranded for at least an hour, based on when they'd called, and I knew that in these conditions, hypothermia can kill in 2 hours or less if you're not properly equipped. So I got back in my patrol vehicle, engaged four-wheel drive, and headed north into the closed section. The road was in worse condition than I'd expected. Snow depth varied from 18 inches in wind-swept areas to over 4 feet in drifts, and the surface underneath was rutted ice from the last time the road had been used before winter closure. My vehicle struggled, the tires spinning, the engine laboring, the temperature gauge climbing as the radiator worked overtime. I passed through sections of forest where spruce trees grew so close to the road that their snow-laden branches scraped the sides of my vehicle, creating sounds like fingernails on metal. After maybe 20 minutes of driving, I noticed something wrong. My radio, which had been working fine, started producing interference. Not normal static, but a sound like bells, like thousands of small silver bells ringing in complex rhythms, creating patterns that were almost musical, but slightly off, dissonant, unsettling. I tried calling dispatch, got nothing but those bells, rising and falling in volume, sometimes seeming to come from directly behind me, sometimes from miles away. I checked my cell phone. No signal, expected this far into the backcountry, but the phone itself was behaving strangely. The screen showing the time as 16:41, then 23:17, then 14:02, jumping through different hours without pattern. I looked at the vehicle's digital clock. It was pulsing, the display flickering between different times, occasionally showing dates instead of times. December 25th, 2023, December 25th, 1887, December 25th, 2156, cycling through years that made no sense. Time was behaving wrong. I came around a curve and saw the vehicle. It was a white Toyota 4Runner with California plates, stopped in the middle of the road with its hazard lights on, but the lights were flashing at irregular intervals, creating rhythms that seemed almost deliberate, like they were trying to communicate something. As I approached, I could see two figures standing beside the vehicle, a man and a woman, both facing away from me toward something in the forest to the right of the road. I pulled up behind the 4Runner and activated my light bar, standard procedure, though everything about the scene was triggering warnings in my gut that nothing about this was standard. The temperature had changed dramatically. When I opened my door, the air that hit me was easily 40 degrees colder than what it had been at the barricade, cold so extreme that my first breath hurt, that made my eyes water, and the tears instantly freeze on my cheeks. But the cold wasn't consistent. As I walked toward the two figures, I passed through zones of temperature, stepping from brutal cold into areas that felt almost warm, maybe 40 degrees, and back into cold again, like there were invisible boundaries in the air marking off different climatic regions that had nothing to do with normal weather patterns. I called out to the couple, identified myself as Summit County Sheriff, asked if they needed assistance. Neither of them responded. Neither of them moved. They just stood there, maybe 15 feet from their vehicle, staring into the forest. I moved up alongside them, and that's when I saw what they were looking at. There was a procession moving through the trees, not on the road, but parallel to it, maybe 50 yards into the forest, dozens or hundreds of figures moving in a long line through snow that should have been waist deep, but that they moved through without leaving tracks, without disturbing the surface. They were carrying lights, not flashlights or lanterns, but something else. Globes of light that glowed with a color I'd never seen before, somewhere between silver and blue, pulsing in rhythm with the bells I could still hear from my radio. The figures themselves were dressed in clothing from different eras. Some wore Victorian-era winter garments, long coats and mufflers. Some wore clothing from the 1920s and 1930s, practical winter gear from the early ski era. Some wore modern outdoor clothing, Gore-Tex and fleece. And some wore clothing that I couldn't place at all, garments that looked like they were made from snow itself, from ice crystals woven into fabric, decorated with patterns that shifted and changed when I tried to focus on them. The figures were not quite solid. They were translucent, like they were made of frozen air, visible, but somehow not entirely present in normal space, flickering slightly like images projected through falling snow. And they were singing. Not words, but sounds, harmonizing in patterns that made the air itself vibrate, that seemed to describe the cold, to give voice to winter, to transform the concept of freezing into audible form. I asked the Chens what was happening. Emma Chen turned her head slowly to look at me, and I saw that her eyes were wrong. Her pupils were dilated so far that there was almost no visible iris, just massive black circles that reflected the strange silver-blue light from the procession. When she spoke, her voice sounded distant and layered, like multiple people speaking the same words with slight delays. "They've been walking since the first winter," she said, "since the time when glaciers covered these mountains, when cold was the dominant force, when everything that lived had to negotiate with winter or die. They're the spirits of those who didn't negotiate successfully, the miners who froze in their cabins, the travelers who got caught in blizzards, the climbers who fell into crevasses, the children who wandered from their homes during storms. Everyone who's died from cold in these mountains for the past 150 years. They walk on Christmas because that's when the boundary between living and dead is thinnest in winter, when people think about those who are gone, when the weight of memory makes the veil permeable. They walk the old roads, the paths people took before they died, forever moving through the cold, forever trying to get home, forever one step away from warmth they'll never reach." I asked her how she knew this. She smiled, and it was not a human smile, her lips cracking from the cold, showing teeth that were coated with frost. "They told me," she said. "They've been telling me since we stopped. They speak in bells, and in the sound of wind through frozen trees, and in the crystalline structure of snowflakes. They want us to understand. They want us to know that winter in these mountains is not just weather. It's a force. It's alive. It's conscious. It remembers everyone who's died in the cold, absorbs them, keeps them, makes them part of its eternal structure. The cold isn't trying to kill you. It's trying to recruit you. It's trying to make you one of the walkers, one of the spirits who maintain winter's presence, who keep the cold alive and aware and hungry for more. The singing from the forest grew louder, and I realized it was coming from the figures, from the translucent beings that moved through the trees. Marcus Chen, who hadn't moved or spoken until this moment, suddenly turned to look at me with those same dilated pupils. When he spoke, his voice harmonized with itself, creating chords that shouldn't be possible from a single throat. They want you to see them, Sheriff. They want you to understand. Come closer. Walk to the edge of the forest. Stand at the boundary between the road and the trees. Let them measure you. Let them decide if you're worthy to walk with them, if you're strong enough to become part of winter itself, if you can surrender individual warmth and become part of the cold that never ends. I should have gotten both of them into my patrol vehicle right then. I should have called for immediate medical evacuation, should have treated this as severe hypothermia with altered mental status, should have followed every protocol for cold weather emergency response. But my radio wasn't working, and my phone showed impossible times, and I was standing on a closed mountain road in minus 40-degree cold, watching a procession of translucent figures carrying lights that glowed with colors that shouldn't exist. And these two people were speaking with voices that harmonized with themselves and telling me about winter being conscious and hungry. So I did the only thing I could think of. I walked toward the tree line, walked toward the edge of the forest, close enough to see the procession more clearly, close enough to understand what I was looking at. The figures weren't solid in the way living people are solid. They were more like memories, like impressions of people who had once existed, captured in ice and cold, and preserved forever in a state between life and death. I could see through them to the trees beyond, but I could also see details on their faces, expressions of longing and sorrow and acceptance, the look of people who'd been cold for so long they couldn't remember warmth, who'd been walking for so long they couldn't remember stillness. Their faces showed frostbite and hypothermia, blue lips and blackened fingertips, eyes that wept tears of ice, but they weren't in pain. They were beyond pain. They were beyond everything except the eternal walking, the eternal movement through winter, the eternal maintenance of cold. I could feel them watching me. I could feel their attention focusing on me with an intensity that made my skin burn despite the freezing air, that made my heart race despite the cold that should have been slowing it. And I could hear the singing more clearly now, understand that it wasn't just random harmony, but words, lyrics in languages that ranged from Ute to Spanish to English to languages I didn't recognize, all of them describing the same thing: the beauty of winter, the purity of cold, the perfection of freezing, the way that death by hypothermia is actually peaceful once you stop fighting, once you accept it, once you let the cold in and become part of it. One of the figures near the front of the procession moved closer, gliding across the snow without leaving footprints, and I heard a voice in my mind, not through my ears, but directly in my consciousness. speaking without sound, but with perfect clarity. You are a guardian, the voice said, one who protects the living from harm, who responds when they're in danger, who tries to keep them safe. We are guardians as well. We protect winter. We maintain the cold. We ensure that the mountains remain places where humans cannot simply dominate, where nature still has power, where death is always one mistake away. We have been doing this since the first European settlers came to these mountains thinking they could conquer them with technology and determination. We show them they're wrong. We take those who disrespect the cold, who ignore the warnings, who treat winter as an inconvenience rather than as a force that demands respect. We make them part of winter forever, walking the eternal paths, maintaining the cold through our endless movement. Your people have forgotten how to fear winter. They have heated buildings and insulated clothing and weather forecasts and search and rescue. They think they've mastered the cold. But you can't master winter in these mountains. You can only negotiate with it. You can only show respect and hope it lets you pass. I found my voice, though it came out hoarse from the cold. I asked what would happen if I didn't show respect, if I tried to take the chance and leave. The voice in my mind answered with terrible patience. Then winter would take you all. The cold would intensify. The temperature would drop to levels that would freeze. Exposed skin in seconds. That would make your vehicle's fuel gel. That would make the air itself too cold to breathe. The procession would surround you. The walkers would sing you into joining them, their voices creating resonance that would lower your core temperature, that would make hypothermia feel like falling asleep, that would transform death into acceptance. You would stop fighting. You would step out of your vehicle. You would walk into the forest, and you would become one of us, walking forever, maintaining winter, showing others what it means to disrespect the cold. But we are not unreasonable. We are not cruel. We simply maintain balance. These two people violated the closure. They moved the barricade. They drove into forbidden territory. They disrespected the warnings that exist to keep people safe. They belong to winter now. But you came to help them. You came because it's your duty. You showed respect by coming prepared, by knowing the danger, by taking the risk anyway. We will give you a choice. Walk away. Leave them to us. Go back to the barricade and tell whatever story you need to tell about not being able to find them. Or stay. Try to take them and join the procession yourself when the cold overwhelms you all. I thought about my duty. I thought about the oath I'd taken to protect and serve, to render aid to those in need, to put myself at risk to keep others safe. I thought about the county commissioners and the state patrol and the families of these two people who would want to know what happened to them. But I also thought about the other sheriffs and rangers and officers whose stories I'd heard over the years, whispered accounts of encounters with things that existed outside normal reality, of places where the rules didn't apply, of situations where trying to enforce human law meant challenging forces that had their own laws that predated human presence by millennia. And I thought about something my grandfather had told me when I first became a deputy, advice I'd dismissed as old-fashioned mountain wisdom, but that suddenly made perfect sense. He'd said that in the high country, there were places that belonged to the land, not to people, and that smart law enforcement knew when to enforce the law and when to acknowledge that human authority didn't extend everywhere. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small sprig of spruce that I'd picked up that morning, a habit from childhood, carrying a piece of the forest with me. I held it up toward the procession, a gesture of respect, an offering to forces I didn't fully understand, but that I now recognized were real. Then I spoke, not in English, but in the few Ute words I'd learned from elders over the years. Words that roughly translated to, I honor you. I respect your territory. I acknowledge your authority here. The figures in the procession seemed to pause, to consider. The singing changed, became less aggressive, more contemplative. The voice in my mind spoke again. You understand. You show respect. We will make a different offer. Take one of them. Choose. One can return to the living world, marked by what they've seen, but free to leave. One must walk with us, must become part of winter, must maintain the cold. This is the price. This is the negotiation. Choose now, before the temperature drops further, before we withdraw the offer and take all three of you. I looked at Marcus and Emma Chen. They were both staring at me now, their dilated eyes showing awareness, showing they understood what was being offered, showing they were conscious enough to know that one of them would die tonight. Emma spoke first, her voice still layered but clearer. Take Marcus, she said. He has a daughter from his first marriage. She's 12. She needs her father. I'm an only child. My parents are gone. Take him. Let me walk. Let me become part of winter. At least then I'll serve a purpose. Marcus was crying now, tears freezing on his cheeks. No. Take Emma. She's a surgeon. She saves lives. She's worth more than me. I'm just a software engineer. The world needs her more. I realized what was happening. The procession wasn't just taking the disrespectful. It was testing them. It was showing them what they valued, what they'd sacrifice, whether they'd offer themselves to save another. It was forcing them to confront the reality that winter doesn't care about your career, or your family, or your plans. Winter cares about respect and sacrifice, and understanding that some places demand payment for passage. I made a decision that I've questioned every day since. I pointed to Emma. She goes, I said. She walks with you. He returns to the living. The voice in my mind sounded almost satisfied. You chose the one who offered herself. You honored her sacrifice. You understood that winter respects those who face it willingly. You may take the other, but you will be marked. You will carry the knowledge of what exists here. You will see the procession whenever it walks. You will become a guardian of the boundary, making sure others understand that these mountains demand respect, that winter is not conquered, that some closures exist for reasons beyond bureaucracy. Do you accept? I nodded. Just that small movement. But it was enough. The figures in the procession began to move closer, surrounding Emma Chen. She stood still, no longer trembling, no longer crying, accepting what was coming. The singing intensified, becoming almost unbearably beautiful, creating harmonies that described the structure of snowflakes and the formation of ice crystals and the way that water molecules arrange themselves when they freeze. Emma's body began to change. She became translucent, like the figures, her form becoming less solid, more like frozen air, like a memory of a person rather than an actual person. She turned to look at Marcus one last time, smiled a smile that was both sad and peaceful, then turned and walked into the forest, joining the procession, becoming one of the walkers, her light mixing with theirs, her voice joining their eternal song. Marcus collapsed, his body suddenly solid again, his pupils contracting to normal size. He was sobbing, hyperventilating, his core temperature dangerously low but survivable. I got him into my patrol vehicle, cranked the heat to maximum, wrapped him in the emergency blankets I carried. My radio started working again. I called dispatch, reported that I'd found Marcus Chen, that Emma Chen was deceased, that I'd need search and rescue to help extract us because the road conditions were too dangerous for me to drive back alone. I gave them a story about finding Emma already frozen, about Marcus being in early hypothermia, about the SUV breaking down in conditions too severe for survival. They believed me. Why wouldn't they? It was a plausible story. It happened in these mountains every winter. People died from cold because they made bad decisions, because they underestimated the danger, because they thought modern equipment could overcome ancient forces. Search and rescue arrived 90 minutes later with a snowcat and extracted us. Marcus was hospitalized for 2 days with moderate hypothermia and severe frostbite on his fingers and toes. He told everyone the same story I'd told about Emma wandering from the vehicle in confusion from hypothermia, about not being able to find her in the darkness and cold. Her body was never recovered. The official report listed her as presumed dead from exposure. Her remains likely to emerge from melting snow sometime in late spring or early summer, probably predated by wildlife. The case was closed as an accidental death resulting from poor decision-making and inadequate preparation for winter conditions. But I see her. I see her every time I drive that section of road, which I only do during summer now, when the closure is lifted and the road is maintained. Even in summer, on warm August days, when the temperature is in the 70s and wildflowers bloom in the meadows, I can see the faint outlines of the procession, the transparent figures walking their eternal paths, maintaining winter even when winter isn't visible, keeping the cold alive in the fundamental structure of the mountains, waiting for December when they become fully visible again. The mark appeared about 3 weeks after that Christmas night. I was changing clothes and noticed a pattern on my left shoulder, designs that looked like frost patterns on a window, intricate, crystalline structures arranged in formations that seemed to shift slightly when I looked at them directly. It looked like a scar from frostbite, but I'd never had frostbite there, and it definitely hadn't been present before that night. The mark is always cold to the touch, maybe 10 degrees colder than the rest of my skin, and when I concentrate on it, I can hear the bells, can hear the singing, can feel the presence of the procession, even when they're walking routes dozens of miles away. I've met 8 other people with variations of the mark since then. One is a ski patrol director at Vail who's worked these mountains for 40 years. One is a Ute elder who maintains traditional knowledge about sacred winter sites. One is a climatologist who studies long-term snow patterns and speaks carefully about anomalous cold zones in certain locations. One is a mountain rescue volunteer who's recovered more bodies from winter deaths than anyone else in Colorado. One is a snowplow driver who works the high passes and who once told me, quietly, that he sees things moving in blizzards that aren't human, but aren't quite anything else either. One is a backcountry avalanche forecaster who maps terrain based on factors that don't appear in any textbook. One is a photographer who documents winter landscapes and whose images sometimes show figures that weren't visible when he took the photos. One is a woman who runs a mountain hostel and who keeps certain rooms reserved on Christmas Eve for guests who check in but are never seen leaving. We all have stories. We all have encounters with the procession, with the spirits who walk winter's eternal paths. We don't talk about it openly. We can't. But we recognize each other. We know the look in each other's eyes, the weight of knowing, the burden of protecting people from forces they don't believe in. I requested a transfer to a different county 11 months ago. The request was denied by the county commissioners without explanation. My undersheriff, a man who's lived in Summit County his entire 67 years, pulled me aside after the meeting. Some sheriffs are elected because they're good administrators, he said. Others are kept in office because they have knowledge their county needs, even if most people don't understand why that knowledge matters. You have that knowledge now. These mountains need someone who understands what walks the winter paths, who can make sure that when people want to violate closures or ignore warnings, someone with authority can explain why those rules exist. That's you now. The commissioners know it. Search and Rescue knows it. Everyone who's lived here long enough knows that there are places in these mountains where winter is more than weather, where the cold has become something conscious and hungry. Your transfer was denied because you're needed exactly where you are. I think there's a network. I think throughout the Colorado high country, throughout all mountain regions where winter kills people regularly, there are officials and rangers and longtime residents who understand what the procession is, what winter really means in places where cold is the dominant force for most of the year. And those people work quietly to maintain the boundaries, to keep the closures enforced, to make sure that the sacrifices winter demands are made with as much awareness and dignity as possible. Marcus Chen moved back to California 3 months after that Christmas. He told me, before he left, that he dreams about Emma every night, sees her walking through snow in forests that never end, hears her voice in the wind during storms. He asked me if I thought she was suffering. I told him the truth as I understood it. She's not suffering. She's beyond suffering. She's become part of something vast and ancient, something that exists to maintain balance, to keep these mountains wild and dangerous, to ensure that humans never completely dominate the high country. She serves a purpose. She walks to maintain winter. And in some way that I don't fully understand, that's not a tragedy. It's a transformation. It's transcendence. I'm recording this because winter is coming again, because Christmas is coming, because every year people die in these mountains from cold, and most of those deaths are accidents, are simple failures of preparation or judgment. But some are not accidents. Some are sacrifices. Some are winter, taking what it's owed, maintaining its presence, showing that the mountains still belong to forces older than human civilization. If you come to Colorado, if you visit the high country in winter, respect the closures, respect the warnings, respect the signs that say certain roads are impassable, certain areas are forbidden, certain conditions are too dangerous for travel. Those rules exist for reasons beyond liability concerns. They exist because there are places in these mountains where winter is conscious, where the cold maintains itself through the spirits of those who've died in it, where walking the wrong road on the wrong night means joining a procession that never ends. If you ever find yourself on a closed mountain road in winter, and you see lights moving through the forest, lights that glow silver blue and pulse in rhythm with bells you can't quite locate, don't investigate, don't approach. Turn around immediately and leave. The procession is real. Winter's consciousness is real. And the price for disrespecting the cold is transformation into something that walks forever, singing the songs that keep these mountains frozen and wild and deadly. Most people visit the Colorado Rockies and see beauty and opportunity for recreation. But some can see deeper. Some can perceive the layer of winter consciousness that overlays the physical mountains. And for them, for us, every Christmas brings the awareness that the procession is walking, that winter is recruiting, that the cold is always watching for those who might join it, might serve it, might become part of the eternal force that keeps these mountains from ever being fully tamed. I'll be out there tonight. I'll be out there every Christmas Eve and Christmas night for the foreseeable future. I'll be patrolling the closed roads and the boundary zones, watching for people who might violate the closures, making sure no one else stumbles into winter's territory without understanding what they're walking into. I'll be maintaining my duty to the living while honoring the agreement with the dead, using the knowledge I gained that December night to keep both worlds in balance. That's my job now. That's the price I pay for choosing who would live and who would walk, for accepting the mark, for becoming one of those who sees. The procession is always walking. Winter is always watching. And somewhere in the frozen forests, above 11,000 feet, spirits who were once human continue their eternal paths, maintaining the cold, keeping the mountains wild, waiting for others who will join them, who will learn what Emma Chen learned, that becoming part of winter is not an ending, but a transformation. Not death, but transcendence into something vast and ancient and necessary. My name is Sheriff Linda Crawford, Summit County, Colorado, guardian of the boundary, keeper of winter's secrets, witness to the procession. Welcome to the high country. The mountains are beautiful. The snow is deep. And somewhere in the frozen places where tourists never go, where closures keep the unprepared safe, winter walks on two legs and sings in voices of those who couldn't respect the cold, couldn't understand the danger, couldn't accept that some places belong to forces beyond human control. Respect the closures, honor the warnings, and if you hear bells ringing in the forest on Christmas night, if you see lights that glow silver blue moving through the trees, don't follow them. Don't wonder what they are. Just know that winter is walking, that the cold is maintaining itself, that the mountains are claiming what they're owed, one frozen step at a time, one voice added to the eternal chorus, forever and always until the last glaciers melt and the high country remembers what warmth means.